Welcome to Proudly Asian, a podcast series that tells bold and proud stories of Asians by Asians. I'm Isabel Wong, a financial journalist who wants to uncover the many Asian stories around us that are waiting to be told. There's never just one way to look at Asians. This podcast will take you through a deep dive into the life stories, struggles, and triumphs of young Asians around the world. On today's episode, we have Saeng Douangdara, a Lao-American personal chef and food instructor based in LA. Born in a refugee camp in Southeast Asia after his parents fled Laos, he went on to grow up in Wisconsin from the age of 2. The Rat in the Kitchen contestant talks to us about how he uses food as a catalyst to teach people about the history and cultures of underrepresented communities. Welcome back to Proudly Asian. Well, for this month, it continues to be our very own Proudly Asian Food Month, where we will be in talks with Asian chefs and food entrepreneurs from around the world to learn more about Asian cuisines that aren't as well known and understood. And this episode, I'm so happy to bring in Saeng because he'll be telling us all about Lao food and the culture. Welcome to Proudly Asian, Saeng.
Hi, Isabel. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat all about Lao food.
Thank you so much for joining us for Proudly Asian. What have you been working on these days? What's been keeping you busy, Saeng?
Let's see. Recently, actually, I came back from San Francisco from a farm-to-table pop-up, and I got to serve one of my iconic dishes. I would say it was my Lao sausage love story meatballs, which I loved every time I cook for people. I love seeing their reaction. And so I've been doing that. And then the season finale of my cooking competition show, Rat in the Kitchen, just aired a couple days ago. And so people can still tune in on TBS, Rat in the Kitchen.
Wow, that's amazing. I remember seeing the YouTube short about the sausage love story, and I loved that video.
Yeah,
it's such a lovely story.
Thank
but
you.
Before we get into Lao food and what that means to you, for our listeners out there who would like to get to know a little bit more about yourself, could you tell us about your background? Who are you? What are you? And where did you grow up, Saeng?
Totally. Let's see. I will start from where I was born. So my parents are Lao from the country Laos, and they fled Laos during the Vietnam War. And so I was born in a refugee camp in Thailand. And then we moved to the United States when I was 2 years old. And so luckily I don't remember anything from the days of the refugee camp. And we moved to the Midwest in Wisconsin. And so I like to think of that as a blessing, even though at the time it was very different. But I was raised and lived in Wisconsin most of my life. If people don't know Wisconsin, it's all about cheese and bread. And I think growing up there, that kind of helped me foster and value Lao food even more, just because there was no Lao restaurants around. So every time my mom cooked, it was always Lao food. And then for me, I left Wisconsin to pursue my master's in counseling psychology, to be a trained mental health therapist in Hawaii. And then after that, I flew into California to live my Hollywood dreams. Still working on it. But yeah, I've been in Los Angeles now for the past almost 10 years as a personal chef, food content creator, storyteller, all of the above.
Wow, that's amazing. And I mean, for our listeners who are interested in checking out Saeng's work, he's definitely very active on social, which is Instagram and YouTube channel. So do check out Saeng's YouTube channel, which we'll ask about later on. And I just want to get into a little bit of the specifics in terms of the journey that your parents went through from Laos to the refugee camp. Did they ever tell you about the journey that they went through?
Yeah, I think growing up, they would hint to pieces of their journey. And for me, as the middle child, I kind of had to put the puzzle pieces together. So like my dad was a soldier that fought with the US and fought to during the Vietnam War. And then he actually met my mom, I think a couple years before the war. And so they are from southern Laos in Savannakhet area. And that was actually, my mom tells me a little bit of their love story. It's very different from a love story in the United States, because from a short form, it's like my dad's like, hey, you want to go with me? I know you've known me for a few months, but you want to go with me? I'm fighting a war, and I would love for you to come with me. And so my mom left her entire family, her village, and they got into a refugee camp. My dad was taken out into, I believe, a concentration camp, and then they were able to find each other again. I was born. I had an older sister, and so it was the four of us. Where when the war ended, my dad told my mom, was like, okay, you have another option. You either go back to southern Laos, or you can come to the United States with me. And with given that option, my mom was actually didn't want to go to the United States, because she didn't know what the US was. It was very foreign to her. Imagine, like, her village, they didn't have a television, they didn't have running water, they had to build their own fires to make food. So it's very remote. So my mom took the risk and left with my dad out of love, and then we made it to Wisconsin, where, I mean, my dad will mention bits and pieces of his war stories, and I think, PTSD is involved, but at this moment, I think it's more of understanding their journey in order for me to move forward in mine, and I think to this day I'm still grabbing pieces and parts to their journey.
Yeah, and I also know that, for a lot of children who grew up with immigrant parents, they would
Hmm.
remember, asking their parents, like, hey, mom and dad, what was your love story? And then they would always say, oh, it's nothing epic. It's just basically, a
Mm.
lot of the times it's like, oh, the dad decided to move away, let's say to America, and be like, are you coming? And that's basically the proposal story because, like,
Very
if the mom
exactly.
decided to go, then they had to get married, right? So
Hmm.
and so from Laos, from the refugee camp, and then eventually your family settled in Wisconsin. I'm just wondering, what was your experience growing up in Wisconsin like as an immigrant child?
So the reason why my parents settled in Laos was because they had a group of friends that moved there earlier before them, and so that's why we got there. And so once we got to Wisconsin, there was maybe five or six other Lao families within the small. It was like a 50,000 population city. So most of the people were white, and there's like handful of like Southeast Asian refugees, like I think of like Cambodian, Vietnamese, Hmong. And so growing up in that city, I think I didn't realize I was different, or I didn't acknowledge maybe the microaggressions until I got older and understood, like, oh, maybe that's why I was so quiet or shy, because I would always hear my parents like, don't start conflict, like we don't want to cause any issues, we just want to survive, because I mean their experience was coming from war, and so they've already dealt with so much stress. So I think their lessons to me and my other siblings was just get through the day, get through the week, get through the year, because we just want to have a table full of food at the end of the day and not have any issues or conflict. And so I think now as an adult, I understand like a lot of the microaggressions and even the blatant racism that we experienced in the town, but also understanding at the time it was a very a different space where, like, I think these days, like, I feel more confident in talking about my experiences in confronting those racist people. But I think back then it was a very scary time.
And did your classmates ever ask you questions about, let's say, the food that you brought to school growing
Mhm.
up? What kind of food did you grow up with? Was it strictly Lao food or would it be a mix of different foods?
I hear a lot of like my other Asian friends, they always tell me about their stories of like bringing, or maybe not feeling proud to bring their Asian food to school. But I think for me, it was different because my mom didn't have time to pack me a lunch to go to school. But I had I was on free lunch at elementary school. So it was always like cheeseburgers or pizza with fries or tater tots. So I didn't have that much of an issue because I wasn't bringing anything from home to school. But I think I did realize I was like, oh, my food is very different compared to like the outside world. And I think the difference was knowing that like my mom had hesitations of introducing our Lao food to people that were not Lao. And I think that was what kind of struck me. I was like, oh, that's strange. Like for me, I enjoyed both the Lao food and also the junk food at school. And so for me, had a hard time understanding where that came from and the fear of our own food. For the kids growing up, I think I was very much of a quiet, kid in the corner. Like I just wanted to finish my homework and not get into any fights. So I didn't have too many issues.
I see. And when you were at school, were you actually vocal about yourself being Lao or, your parents coming from Laos? And did you get a lot of questions about your heritage?
Mm.
And what were some of the most common questions that you used to get?
I think in elementary school and in middle school, I identified more as just being Asian because I didn't understand what ethnicity was. I didn't understand what being like Lao was until I got into high school, where I was able to explore more of my own identity. And then that was where I was able to gain more confidence in telling my community and my parents and my own story. And so I think people would ask oh, like, where are you from? And I mean, that question, even to this day, I'm like, how do I answer that? But at the time as a kid, I'm like, oh, I'm from like the street Linden Avenue over there. And they're like, no, like where? I'm like, what do you mean? And so it was kind of like diving into like what their intentions were. And so then I would be like, oh, okay, you mean you want to know my war story? Like I'm from Laos. And yeah, I think it's the kids, most of them, I had really good experiences. I think it's just because like me and my family were very quiet. I don't know if it would be different if we lived in California or New York, where maybe we felt more free to express ourselves.
As a Lao kid, you grew up in America, so it makes you Lao-American. But do you know if your experience growing up in America would be completely different to someone who just grew up in Laos? Like, have you heard any differences in terms of the experience?
Yeah, it would be quite a big difference. I know that because I went back to Laos for the first time in 2018, I believe. I went to visit my family for the first time, my extended family in southern Laos, and it was only me. And that was a journey, like a homecoming journey for me, because I really wanted to dive even deeper into my story and my parents. And so seeing how they lived even in 2018 was eye-opening, because I met my nephew, my cousin slash nephew. He was like a 2-year-old boy, and his name was Galabao. And that the name means steam bun in Lao. And so I thought that was so cute that little kid was named Galabao. And I actually named my current dog Galabao in inspiration from that. But seeing like we would ride like tuk-tuks, like it was like an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours to their village from the hospital to their village. So just imagining like if something were to happen in this remote area, it would take them 2 hours to get to the hospital. And also the experiencing the food that they made for me. Like they killed the chicken right in the backyard. They plucked it. They they cooked it over a fire. It was a beautiful experience because like meat over there is so valuable. And so I think like growing up as a Lao American here, it's just I think we don't realize how much, at least for me, I took for granted until understanding what it was for kids in Laos.
You certainly know it's a very special occasion when they decided to kill an animal
Yeah, I was like,
in the
wow.
village.
Right in front of me, I was like, oh my God.
But here's a question about your Lao heritage. Do you identify yourself as Lao or Laotian?
Mm,
Because there's definitely a difference between the two identities. And
yes.
for our listeners who aren't very familiar, could you also help us
Mm.
understand what's the difference?
Yeah, I love that question because I think it's such a commonly misunderstood term going back and forth. So for me, it also took time. So just being so I right now identify as a Lao American. But if you out talk to me when I was in high school, I would say I was Laotian American. In the context of understanding the difference of Laotian and Lao, the big one is that Laotian was a term that was created in order to by the French in order to clump everyone in Laos together, saying like I compare it to like, oh, like I'm American is kind of similar to I'm Laotian, right? It's the broader nationality of the country. But Laos is very unique in the sense that it has over 100 plus ethnic groups. I think of Khmu, Tai Dai, Hmong. And so a lot of the times people don't like referring to themselves as Laotian. But it also depends. It's just you got to ask them like, how do you like to be called? My decision to switch from Laotian to Lao was because I wanted to be specific in my ethnic background, and I didn't want to clump myself into the larger picture, just because the f- there's a lot of colonization in Laos because of the French, and that term also comes from that. And so it's kind of like I think of it as decolonizing how I identify. And so right now, I would say either terms are fine. It's just more of asking the person. So right now, I think the broader context of people that are not Lao and understanding this is that Laotian is the nationality, and then Lao is one of the ethnicities of the 100 plus, but it's the majority group in Laos.
So even for people from Laos or like people who grew up in Laos these days, would the term Laotian still apply, or it would only be strictly applied to those who were born around the French rule?
It's so if you go to Laos right now, a lot of the people will say they're Lao. They will use Lao as also like the nationality at the same. It's very complicated, but like let's say if you're a Hmong person right now in Laos, what I've experienced at least is that they'll say, "Oh, they're Lao Hmong," so it's kind of like saying American at the front and then their ethnicity next.
Mm,
And so there's some like if your ethnicity is Khmu, they might say I'm Lao Khmu or things like that.
I see.
But so the Laotian is more of the world. Like if you leave Laos, it's kind of what the world has forced upon Laos.
I mean, that's very important to understand. And your suggestion would be like for foreigners who meet a person who has Lao heritage or like from Laos, the best question to ask would be like, would you like me to identify you as Lao or like Laotian? Like that would be the best
Mhm.
starting point. Is that
Yeah,
right?
that would be the first one, and then because I think that'll also give them an or maybe they'll explain like understanding of like their own identity and how they see the larger picture of who they are.
And next up, I would like to understand a little bit more about Lao cuisine. And through Lao cuisine, what can we actually learn about the culture? So let's start off with the basics. Saying, could you help us understand what is Lao food really? And what are the common dishes and ingredients that are usually used in the cuisine?
Yeah, so Lao food because it's so underrepresented and not known well, like many people will have this idea like, oh, is it similar to this country's because we're neighbors or this one? But because my job and my work is very rooted in Lao food, I think I kind of hold a more nuanced look at what Lao food can be and is to me. So I usually start by breaking down. Oh, the first thing is I don't know if you can see if you see my background.
Yes.
So my background is Lao sausages, also aka Sai Or in Lao. It's one of the gateway Lao foods. So once you try Lao sausages, you'll never go back, and you want to try all these other Lao dishes. Um, so I would say Lao food in general it has three pillars. So the pillars are like sticky rice for all pretty much all the meals, unless you're eating a noodle dish. The second one is badak, which is unfiltered fish sauce. So you think of fish sauce, which is like the clear brown liquid, but unfiltered is the method before you get that. So it's like the murky, even extra funky, umami rich liquid gold, I like to describe it. And then the third one is pairing all that with spice and herbs. And it's just like a explosion, umami explosion through every bite. And so I think of those three foundations as Lao food, and just also the general idea of that it's very sustainable in that, in the essence that nothing is ever wasted. Like that chicken that my family killed for me, they use the bones to make the soup and broth. They use the meat and the skin to make lap, and then they actually went to pick from the trees to make different dipping sauces, and they use like you can use the bile, the guts, everything is used, but in a very delicious way. And so those are the foundations of kind of what makes Lao food. And then I usually tell people just to enter into, if you're an open-minded person in like trying different foods, if you haven't tried Lao food before, definitely try Lao sausages, nam khao, which is fried rice. And then the general lap is the national dish of Laos, with sticky rice.
Oh, that sounds so delicious. And are there any special occasions or festivals that are observed by Lao people? And are there any specific festive dishes that would be
Mhm.
made or consumed during those periods?
I think of the biggest festival celebration is Lao New Year. And that happens every mid-April for like 3 days. It's a huge celebration where people come together, like they cleanse, they clean, get rid of the old, let the new enter. And at the time, that's where people would go to temple to get blessings. And there's also a huge parade at the third day. And throughout the 3 days, there are so much Lao food, like a lot of Lao street food. One food that's always there is khao tom, which is like a sticky rice parcel. It's like a dessert, and sometimes it comes in, it's wrapped with sticky rice, coconut milk, and then a small baby bananas placed in the middle, or what is it, some beans are placed there and then steamed, so you get this almost mochi like texture but still crumbly. And so that one's always available, and it's just a fun time. Like for me, actually, this past year, I went to Lao New Year in Saginaw, Texas, and I've heard about this New Year for years, but I was scared to go because it's actually known as one of the biggest celebrations, even outside of Laos. It might be even bigger. But people are wild there. There's so much joy and happiness, and it gets really rowdy. They even brought like a camel to the parade this year, which was pretty epic.
But why Texas? Is it because there's a very large Lao community there?
Yeah, Texas was one of the big hubs when the Lao refugees came into the United States. So Texas was a big hub for them.
I see. And do they just welcome Lao people? Like, will foreigners who are curious to check out, are they welcome to join as well?
Yeah, definitely. Like Lao New Year and these celebrations are welcome for all. I think when if you're not familiar with like Lao culture, cuisine, and festivals, I usually recommend, like, if you want to come, just come, observe, make some friends, and then these friends are always open to introducing you to like all the different parties and foods.
Yeah, because I saw you also uploaded a YouTube short that you filmed from there, and I just
Hmm.
thought it looked so fun and
Yeah.
everyone looks so happy. So, yeah, definitely, if I get a chance, I would like to try it out.
Yeah, definitely, please.
And I mean, next up, do you think there's enough understanding about Lao cuisine? And when Lao food is mentioned, how do people normally react?
Mm. Um, so there is the Lao food movement happening within the past few years now, and Chef Sang in Washington D.C., who owns the restaurant Tip Khao, she was the one that is started it, created it, and is really paving the way for a lot of my the stuff I do and other future Lao chefs. And so I think before then there was always this undertone of like, oh, like Lao food, you have to ask you have to go to Thai restaurants and ask for their secret menu, which is usually a Lao cook that's cooking at the Thai restaurant. Um, and so that's the whole other like story. But essentially, it's so a lot of people that came over here in '75, they their degrees didn't matter anymore. Their jobs, their amazing jobs in Laos, they didn't matter anymore. So they had to start from scratch. And the only thing they knew is a lot of the things they knew is like how to cook and how to make delicious foods. But at that time, they noticed that Thai food was well marketed. Everyone knew about Thai food. It was a huge wave. And so they kind of joined that wave in saying, okay, we can open up a Thai restaurant because we don't have to work on the marketing and people already know it. And since that's our sister country, we know how to make the food. And so that kind of was the start of a lot of Lao refugees opening up Thai restaurants across the United States. And so coming into, I think, the 1990s to now, I think that's when we have a really big surge of a lot of Lao people feeling confident and empowered in their identity and their food, and really showing off like, okay, I don't have to be behind another cuisine. I can, step forward and really shine bright. And I think it's like the fear that other people may not like your food, but it's also the reminder that your food is not going to be liked by everyone, but the ones that do will continuously come and support your restaurant. And so, yeah, Chef Sang has been an incredible figure in our community, paving the way to just promote Lao food, and she's been one of my mentors that I really look up to. And so I think that's why I want to pass on this like empowerment momentum into the community, so they feel even more loved, and that they can make more restaurants so we have more opportunities to go out there.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly are a very active advocate for the Lao heritage and cuisine because you also work as a personal chef and food instructor. So, whenever people got to try out your foods,
Hmm.
what would be their reactions normally, and
Mm,
which are some of the dishes that would wow them the most?
yeah. When they try Lao food or my dishes that I make for them, they're I usually see like their eyeballs open up even wider, like they're surprised, like they didn't expect it. Like going back to the Lao sausages, it looks just like a regular maybe Italian sausage, right? But when you cut it up and try it, you get all these flavors of like lemongrass,
Mm.
galangal, mixed in with a bird eye chili pepper, fish sauce. It's and then you pair it with sticky rice, and they fall in love. It's like it's watching them fall in love again with a different type of cuisine that they never had before. But I think it's also like a familiar taste, but the intensity level is so heightened to another level that they didn't know that you can go to the next level of flavor. And so usually when people try it, they come back and they want, okay, what's the next dish you recommend? What's the next? And so I usually have like a pyramid of like, okay, they made it to this level, so let's get to them to the next level, see how brave they are and going. So like the foundation, I there's papaya salad. It's very different from Thai. So Lao papaya salad is called tamakung, and the main difference is that you'll visually see it. Lao papaya salad is very dark and funky typically, and then the Thai is more of a lighter, brighter, like vinaigrette-ish kind of papaya salad. And then that usually pairs with like a grilled chicken with sticky rice and like several different dips that we call jail, which is like very spicy.
And I mean, what's at the top? What's the most extreme level?
Oh, okay. So there's two foods. So if you ever want to try, that's where I'll crown the Lao food students. So the second one of the tops is called lap dip, which is raw beef salad, and so it's made from typically beef steak, and it's not cooked. It's kind of like if people don't know, if usually people have a hesitation because it's raw, but that's the when I have to bring in like, oh, how about tartare, like for the French? And I don't like having to, have bring that in, but if that gives a person a reference point, then so be it. So it's usually this lap dip that's mixed in with a lot of like lemongrass, cilantro, green onions, coriander. and it's actually seasoned with beef bile,
Mm.
which it sounds very different, but it adds such a unique flavor profile. One of the unique flavor profiles in Lao cuisine is like we like playing with bitter flavors.
Mm.
So beef bile is actually bitter depending how much you put in there. But it balances the tartar very well, and it's one of my favorite dishes. I grew up actually scared of it because my parents would never let me eat it.
Oh.
So I didn't eat it until my early 20s, and I was like, wow, this is so good.
It's like to your parents, like this is the secret that they've been keeping you from.
Yeah, I think it was because it's so expensive, and they're like, this steak, we could eat it. And then the one more was it's called lap lut. So you're gonna hear me say lap a lot because lap is actually not just one type of. It's not one dish. Lap has a variation. It's like an umbrella of a lot of different dishes. So lap lut is actually was it duck's blood lap made out of duck's blood. And it has to be fresh, like the duck has to be killed right there, and the blood has to be coagulated. I didn't have it until I went to Laos for the second time, and I was very scared at the same also because it's duck's blood. But it tastes like Jello,
Oh.
and yeah, it was very unique. And I think that is also an example of that. Nothing is wasted. So you get a duck's blood, and then you can make lap duck with it. But those are the top things that I would say if for
Mm.
adventurous eaters.
So for the raw beef salad, the beef is not cooked in any way at all. You just put on a completely raw steak. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's nothing's cooked, but you'll just finely mince up the beef, and then typically people say like the lime that's squeezed on top. If you like lime, that'll help cook it a little bit. But
Oh.
yeah, it's very red and green from the herbs.
Interesting. Wow. And you mentioned a little bit of translating what Lao food was to some people. I mean, of course, for a lot of Asian chefs, and even for the chefs that I've spoken to for this series, they would
Mm-hmm.
say they often find themselves translating the cuisine that they
Mm.
cook or their cuisines to something like, oh, this is like curry, but different. Or like they would have to put on a whole
Mm.
performance in terms of, making it look very entertaining by kneading the dough, stretching the dough to draw people's attention
Yeah.
in order to try to get them to try out the food. Have you
Mm.
ever faced something similar in terms of when you're introducing Lao food to people who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, when you say that, it makes me think of the time where I think it was in 2017 where I started the Lao sticky rice flip challenge. And that was kind of like to entertain but also to bring curiosity in what I was doing. So if you haven't seen how traditional Lao sticky rice is made, it's made in a bamboo, like kind of like a upside down triangle bamboo contraption, and then the sticky rice goes in the middle, and then on the bottom is this metal contraption that has water steaming into the bamboo. So the rice is never touching the water. That's what
Mm.
sticky rice is so very special in that way, that you don't cook sticky rice in water. You always have it steamed. And so in that process, in halfway in the cooking process, you have to take the bamboo sticky rice off, and then you have to gently flip it so that the top is now at the bottom, and then you place it back onto the steamer. And so my way of entertaining and bringing people in was like, hey, so let's see how high can I flip the sticky rice. So I would actually use it as like a trampoline, and then I would like
Wow.
hit the sticky rice ball. I would go up really high, then I would try to catch it. Well, I would always catch it because it was not bad. It was really bad to drop your rice. And so I started this challenge, and I had people from all around the world join in. The Lao people that felt like, oh, like that's something that I grew up eating and having, but I never knew like I could do this to like, and people would be so curious about it because it's something so normal to you is so different to other people, and we don't realize that until we get outside of our circle. And so I think that was one of the examples of like, how do I bring in more people into Lao food through just an act of like cooking.
Mm. Yeah, I guess what you just mentioned there, that applies to people who consider their food more like normal and common because, coming from, let's say, for example, people who grew up with Western cuisines, right? Whenever they
Hmm.
saw people eating different types of Asian cuisines, they'd be like, that's not normal. That's ew,
Yeah.
right? But then that's actually completely normal to some Asian communities. And I mean, I just don't really like how people always like dissing other people's food, thinking that that's not
Yeah.
normal, while a huge community of people actually grew up eating that kind of food.
Hmm.
So, which brings me to ask, growing up with Lao food, Lao cuisines, what are some of the most common misconceptions you've heard about the cuisine?
Growing up having Lao food and misconceptions. Hmm. I mean, the common thing I think about is just like people just thinking it's gross because it's not their normal. Um, and so like I think of lop again
Mm.
because sometimes like depending on which lop you get, let's say it's chicken lop, like a cooked chicken lop, it kind of looks like a ground protein mixed in with some vegetables, herbs, and the one thing that makes it different is that we're having like sticky rice in our hand, and then we're using that as a utensil or spoon to grab the meat, the dip, and so that when people that are not Lao see that, they're like kind of shocked because they're like, "Oh, are your hands dirty? Are your did you wash your hands? Why don't you use a spoon?" And yada yada yada. But I think that's actually one of the biggest things that, at least from the Western side, people always comment on like, "Are your cleanliness because you're eating with your hands?" But I think that's a projection of who they are. I was like, "Y'all better wash your hands when you do stuff."
Yeah, I mean, people eat burgers with their hands also. So
Yeah,
why?
exactly. It's a very hypocritical. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would like to understand a little bit more about what can one learn about Lao culture through its cuisine because on the internet
Mm,
it actually
mhm,
says that Lao culture is centered on the pleasures of life, which is like eating, drinking, sleeping, and chatting with friends, and
mhm.
work obligations rarely take priority over socialization. And it's common to be asked if meals, weekend activities, weddings, or whatever that you are doing right now is, I hope I pronounce it right. The term is muan,
One, mhm.
which is translated as enjoyable. Please correct me if I
Yep.
did not say it right. How accurate is this description?
I think it's fairly close actually. So the word is muon. So Lao, the language is like five tones. So even though like it takes even for me, I'll say a word and be like, oh, that's the wrong tone. But so the word is muon, which is means fun, enjoyable. And I think it is fairly true because they have the term also. I might have seen this somewhere. It said sabai sabai, which also means like chill, relax. Like we're gonna live the sabai sabai life. I want to live the chill. Like I think of maybe like I think of surfers. Like they just like the stereotypical surfers. Like we're just chill, like surfer boys. That's kind of the vibes that I want to say that that we do in Laos. That we're drinking, eating is like the top priority. I think of like when my mom's parents would come over to our house, like there was always a meal available. Like it was a big meal. There was never a snack. It was always like, we have a big meal for you when you enter. And the first thing my mom's gonna ask you is like, "Jiao kin kao le bo," which is like, have you eaten yet? But also like if you have eaten, you're still gonna eat. So too bad.
It just keeps on giving in terms of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
when you think you finished the dish, there's more coming.
Exactly. And that's the sense of that. I think that food is truly love for I think a lot of Asian households, and especially for my Lao parents. Like I didn't hear the words "I love you," but I heard of a lot. Have you eaten yet? Will you come eat? We're here.
Yeah, that's quite interesting because throughout the whole series, I asked different Asian chefs and different like food influencers in terms of what would be the
Hmm.
most common or like most significant phrase that's used in their Asian language. They would always say, "Have you eaten yet?" And I've spoken to a Burmese restaurant founder, and he also said, "Have you eaten yet?" would now be used as a phrase for people to pick up girls as well. So it's
Oh my god.
it's quite interesting. But
That's the way. I mean,
yeah.
food is to the heart.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. But saying here's a personal question for you. What is your favorite Lao dish?
Oh, that's so hard. And it really depends on the day. But I think I like was it so Laos has a lot of different stews. Like they're very different stews that sometimes you can't even find at a restaurant because the ingredients are hard to find or it just takes so long that when you're offered this stew, it's like you gotta eat it because it's like this magical stew that will take forever to make. So one of the my favorite stews is called gang kilik, which is a type of vet herb that is like processed and then the liquid is like um spun out. And so it's like this green, murky, thick green stew that has typically has like maybe some type of protein like pork. And then one of the unique things, if it's a seasonal thing in Laos, so you can also find red ant eggs in this gankilik. And that's like if you haven't had red ant eggs before, it's like a little it's like a hint of sweetness and creaminess that it adds to this dish. And that if you're offered, it takes skill to get red ant eggs because you have to climb up a tree and get like covered in ants fighting you off to grab their eggs. And so I would say gankilik, if you get offered that, sometimes it might just be pork and sometimes there might be some red ant eggs in there, but it's gonna be delicious.
That's interesting. And with that, it's time for us to move on to the next segment, which is called Rapid Bias. In this segment, I'll be asking my guests biased questions they've got asked at some point in life, and also some common biased questions that Lao people get asked a lot. So, Saeng, are you ready?
I'm not, but I am.
All right, let's go. First question. Is Lao food the same as Thai food?
That one, I'm always gonna say 100% no. Go try Lao sausages and tamakung pap Lao papaya salad, and you'll know right away.
And next up, so you're Laotian. Which ocean?
Oh, so many times. King of the Hill. Yes, that was representation, but also, is that what we want?
And next up, do you really eat raw food?
I do. It's delicious, and you should try it.
Next question. You are making food dirty. Why are you eating with your hands?
I eat with my hands because eating is intimate, and I want to enjoy eating to the 100% level.
And finally, that's poison. Why are you adding MSG in your food?
When I hear that, I always tell people make sure you go, do your research, read those articles. That there's so many articles out there that's been a myth, and MSG's so good, y'all. Don't skip on it.
That's the evil good. Once you try it, you can't go back.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for answering all the tough questions in this Rapid Fire segment, Saeng.
Yeah, of course.
And finally, to wrap up the episode, Saeng, other than the basics, what is one phrase in Lao that you would like to teach our audience about?
I would say, well, it's related to food and eating. I'd say the phrase is koi hiu kao, which is I am hungry. But also at the same time, we use the word kao, which means rice as hungry. So so we use rice as food. So if you translate it literally, it means I am hungry for rice. But in general, it means just food overall. So koi hiu kao.
Koi hiu kao. I'm always hungry for rice.
Yes. Me too.
Yes. And for those who would like to check out your work or even try out your food, where can they find you?
So if you all want to try my recipes or just see the different content I make, most of my content is at Saeng Douangdara, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. And then if anyone's ever in Los Angeles, I can give you recommendations on where to try restaurants. I'm a personal chef, and so sometimes I have pop-ups. So if you're lucky enough to come at the right time, I might have a pop-up.
Ooh, nice. I'll definitely ask you for your recommendations whenever I'm in LA.
Yeah, definitely.
And Saeng, a final question for you. What does it mean to be proudly Lao?
What does it mean? I feel like that question I could is like one of my prompts I would do for my storytelling. I think for that, I always go to being unapologetically myself. So I am unapologetically Lao, which means that I will eat the food I want to eat. I will, be who I am without having to diminish any of my essence. And I think I encourage everyone else, and whether you're Lao or not, it's be unapologetically yourself, because that is really what can transform the world.
Absolutely, yeah. And for kids out there, don't heart your school lunch, don't heart your food, be proud and
Hmm.
enjoy your food. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us, Saeng.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
That's it for this episode of Proudly Asian. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at proudly.asian for more content. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Leave us a 5-star review on wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and signing off for now. I'm Isabel Wong.